Knives are special to me, and they're special in a way that goes all the way back to when my grandfather gave me my first fixed blade hunting knife when I was 8 years old. And when I give people knives for a reason. It goes back further than my grandfather giving me a knife, yet that's the first knife I remember getting. But the idea that when I read the story where David and Jonathan become friends and Jonathan gives David his sword, one of the only two swords in Israel, if I understand the story correctly, then giving someone your blade, giving someone a blade that belongs to you, not only makes it a gift, but makes that person special in your life. And I want to tell you a knife story. When you first put your hand on it, you feel like you've stepped into the past. The handle is made out of wood, and the wood is hand-shaped. It has melted metal brads holding the wood onto the tang of the knife. There are initials roughly carved into the lead at the base of the handle, and the blade is burnished black, and it stands in stark contrast to the silver of the edge. When you first pick it up and you look at the color and you feel the weight of it, it must be at least 150 years old. A mountain man in the late 1800s surely carried it. And through some happenstance, he traded it, lost it, or sold it. But now this knife, this antique, this knife that belonged to a mountain man resides in the knife collection that belongs to my dad. But if you look at it close, if you look at it real close, on close inspection, some of that wonder falls away. Because just as the tang enters the handle, one can find a fine set of ridges. And the ridges tell the story. The ridges tell you that this was not always a knife. In fact, the ridges are so distinct that anyone could tell this used to be a file, a cheap, common, ordinary, everyday $6 file. And there's a reason why the knife maker left the telltale signature of the ridges. In all honesty, if you're trying to recreate a 1800 mountain man knife, the ridges represent an imperfection. Anybody can tell this is not what it really was. This is not really a knife, or it didn't used to be a knife, or it wasn't created to be a knife. But once you see the ridges and realize that it wasn't created as a knife and it wasn't always a knife, you have to realize that something changed it. And the process of turning a file into a knife is very similar to the process of refining or redefining people. The maker takes the raw materials that had been being used for one purpose were designed maybe even for something else, and through a process of grinding, shaping, honing, and tempering and polishing, the maker creates something totally new and totally different with a different purpose. You see, we were instruments of sin. We were instruments of self. But now we are instruments of the maker. And the fact that God is the craftsman removes our temptations to boast about who we are or how far we've come or what we did to transform ourselves. You see, the boasting comes in the fact that our imperfections are so obvious. The ridges, the imperfections are so noticeable and undeniable that the then versus the now, the what is and the what was, creates such a stark contrast that there's actually glory in the imperfections. Not that God has imperfections, but that God uses imperfections. God makes things that have imperfections function in spite of the imperfections, or even function as if they did not even have the imperfections. When talking about the file knife, I got that knife I got a knife similar to it from a guy named Bobby Brooks. Bobby Brooks made me a knife out of a file. Now, when he did this, Bobby Brooks was a modern day mountain man. He had a leather costume. He had a Kentucky long rifle. He carried a tomahawk that he'd made with a wooden handle. He taught me how to start a fire using flint and steel. In fact, he carried me into the woods and we gathered my own flint and we made the striker on a forge at his house. He actually guided me on the hunt where I took my very first antlered buck. And then as another token of our friendship, he made me this knife that looked like a knife that would have been carried in the 1800s by a mountain man. He made me an antique knife out of a modern file. And I was so fascinated by this knife that I begged him. I said, can we please make one for my dad, and can I help you make it? And so once we started on the knife making process, I was so amazed at the transformation. I went to Home Depot or Lowe's and bought a $6 file. And in his workshop, we began to take this file and transform it into a knife. And as that transformation was taking place, I asked to leave some of the ridges. I asked to leave just a small set of imperfections. He said, well, why would you want to leave those ridges on your knife? I said, because nobody will ever believe that this used to be a file. Nobody will ever believe that this started out as a file and became this knife. We've got to leave some proof, or no one who holds the knife will ever believe that it used to be a file. And so we did. We left proof. And that proof is that the knife we made is really, really special. Now, maybe as knives go, it's not that. Maybe it's just a knife. It's a knife made out of $6 worth of material. Yet the fact that this knife started out as a file adds a whole new dimension to its value. And the fact that this knife was made to be used by my Father, the fact that it is to be used by my Father is what gives it value and purpose and makes it truly, truly special. The ridges tell the tale. I once was, but now I am. You see, files don't just evolve into knives. If a file becomes a knife, there's a purpose and a story that is a testimony to the process that transforms the file into a knife and causes it to become. Solomon, the son of David, will say, as iron sharpens iron, one man sharpens another. Our friends, our companions, even our experiences shape us and sharpen us. But it is truly God that makes us to become. You see, Jesus said, come after me and I will make you to become. Paul said that as we behold the image of Christ, with unveiled, unfiltered faces, we are transformed. He uses the word metamorphosis in the Greek. In the discussion of becoming ambassadors for Christ, Paul even says that we become new creations. Now, those of you who listen to this podcast and also are religious, I know you know this, but it's not about the newness. I want you just for a little bit to consider the ridges, the scars, the flaws, the imperfections, and the evidence of the file that was and the knife that is. See, the past, and I'm not a big fan of living in or dwelling in the past. I'm not a big fan of letting our past define us, but our past doesn't give us our identity. It gives us a comparison. It gives us a contrast. And so in this one instance, I'll make an exception and talk about the past. You see, being an instrument of God is magnificent, but the story has so much more depth when we can remember where we came from and what we were. See, Paul's story has so much more significance when you understand what he was. He tells Timothy, I was a blasphemer, a persecutor, an injurious person, the demon-possessed man. when they show up and they find him sitting and clothed and in his right mind. When the people come and see that, they are frightened. They are more frightened by that than they are the fact that several thousand swine ran off and drowned themselves in the lake. But the fact that he is sitting and clothed in his right mind is only impressive when you compare that to his running, screaming, cutting, tomb-dwelling past. When Jesus is about to leave, the demon man wants to go. He begs him, and Jesus simply says, no, your job is to go home and tell everybody what God has done for you, what God has done in you, what God has done with you. But they know me. They saw me in the tombs. They heard me at night. They saw me naked. They know my past. And it's not just what we are, but what we have been compared to what we are that makes the process of redemption remarkable and wonderful. A change in purpose. Not that we dwell on or dwell in the past, but we simply present the people who know us in the present with the contrast of then and now, before and after. And it's not ever about what we did to transform ourselves, but introducing them to the process and realizing the process, the power, and the promises that caused ourselves to be transformed. And that is the true power of imperfections.